We're starting.
Okay.
And I just share the screen. I think, Всем привет. Так, не видно нас. Так, ага, надо вид поменять. Сейчас, секунду. Yep. It's my first time when I'm with the camera when I
That's
decided
okay.
to do it.
It's my first time doing a live on VK as well, so no
Like this.
problems. Yeah.
And так, всем привет. Я тут на планшете смотрю ваши вопросы. Мне тоже неловко, потому что я первый раз делаю стрим, во-первых, с другим человеком, не сам с собой, а во-вторых, еще и виртуальный фон у меня такой яркий, и в общем, у меня все первый раз. Сегодня мы говорим с Хью Делларом, который он является сооснователем лексического подхода и вообще методистом из Лондона, и классным преподавателем. И сегодня он сможет ответить, я надеюсь, сможет ответить на ваши вопросы по лексическому подходу в частности и по методике вообще в целом, по преподаванию. Я смотрю тут на ваши вопросы, так что поэтому у меня голова не прямая. Так, все, всем привет. Я думаю, мы будем начинать. So, Hugh, hello.
Hey, hello.
You can also introduce yourself if some people don't know you.
Okay. So, hello, my name's Hugh Dellar. I'm a teacher and teacher trainer and coursebook writer based in North London. Along with my co-author, Andrew Walkley, I'm the co-writer of the Outcome series, which you can see here. Okay. I'm also the co-author of the Teaching Lexically methodology series. And since about April this year, I've been running an online language school at lexicallab.com, working with quite a few Russian teachers of English, as it happens. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us and for inviting me along.
Yeah, great to see you here. Actually, it was just my first experience to invite some interesting people, and just the first time doing this stream in live and with videos and with background. So
Yeah.
it's a really nice and just experience. So, well, I think you have the main questions, yeah, from our participants.
I
Could
do.
you read them, I think,
So,
and I will just catch the questions from the stream, okay?
yeah, so I'll go through the questions I've already received so
Okay.
far, and we'll start there.
Mhm.
So I got 3 questions from Ms. Discombobulated, which I'm guessing isn't her real name.
I guess so.
So the first question was, some of my students always ask me what this or that word means. I try and explain the meaning in English or using Google Pictures, but they're eager to translate their ideas into Russian. They tend to list their ideas until they find the right translation according to the context. I'm asking them not to translate, but to make more examples so that I can see whether they have an idea of how the word or collocation is used. How can I prevent it? Are there any ways I can do it differently? So I think the first thing to say here is you shouldn't be surprised if your students use Russian in the classroom, okay? It's a perfectly normal, natural thing, particularly with lower level students, I think. I know for myself, my main foreign language is Indonesian. I'm sort of upper intermediate, advanced level speaker of Indonesian. When I meet new vocabulary in Indonesian, one of the main ways that I check I've understood it is by thinking about how to say it in English. When I'm thinking about how to say something in Indonesian and I don't know the word, I will say it in English to a friend of mine who speaks better Indonesian than me, and I'll get the translation that way. And that's after speaking the language for 25 years, you know, and spending hundreds and hundreds of hours speaking Indonesian in the country. So if I'm still doing that, it shouldn't be surprising that your students are still doing that. I think we all build knowledge on what we already know, okay? And so what your students already know is their first language, which for many of them will be Russian. And if they already know that language and they're meeting a second language, they're going to inevitably add the second language to what they understand of the first language. I think in terms of what you can do about it in class, okay, I think maybe stop asking them for extra examples, because if what you're doing is showing them some language that's new for them, that they've never seen before, okay, how are they supposed to make sensible examples of this new language? So I think maybe what you can do is to give your explanation, okay? You give an extra example sentence, and if you want to check what they can do with that language, then you maybe ask a better question than, can you give me some more examples? And I'll give you an example of how this might work, okay? So yesterday I was teaching, and we were talking a little bit about the way we see ourselves and the way that other people see us. And one of my students was basically saying, I don't care if other people don't like me. There's nothing I can do about it. They can say what they want. People who don't like me are just not going to like me. It's not a problem for me. At which point I taught the expression, yeah, I don't care if people don't like me. Let them say what they want. It's no skin off my nose. Okay. And I gave a little explanation and said, yeah, so if you say it's no skin off my nose, it means it's not a problem for me. It doesn't cause me any problems. Can you think of another example of a situation where you might say it's no skin off my nose? And I think asking for examples of when you might say something or how you might, it is different to, can you give me an example of this word? So I'm basically saying the example is, it's no skin off my nose. What I'm asking the students is, what other situations might I say this in? Okay. And they can say those examples in English or in Russian. I really don't think it matters. If they say it in Russian and you speak Russian, I think then what you can do is to say, yeah, so I know what you mean. You mean blah, 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 blah. And I think asking these better kinds of questions avoid some of these problems, okay? Another example from a recent class, we had the phrase sound people out, which basically means like to ask people for their opinion to help you form a judgment. And I gave an example. Yeah, maybe if I'm the boss and you're my senior teacher and I want to make changes to the school, I might ask you, can you sound out a few of your colleagues and find out what they think about this idea? Report back to me. I then just asked the group, any other times people might need to sound groups of people out? Okay. And that's a very different question to, can you give me some more examples? Personally, if students are saying, I still don't understand it, does it mean blah, 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 in Russian? If you know the answer, just tell them, because the meaning is the least of your problems, okay? The way the word is used and the other words that you use with the words you're learning are much more problematic than the meaning. If you can cover the meaning quickly by just saying, yeah, it's basically this in Russian, you might also be able to say, yeah, but in Russian, we use it like this with these words. In English, they do it differently. They use it like this with these words. So notice the difference in the way they're used. For me, if you're a bilingual teacher and you speak Russian and you're teaching Russian speaking students, you're crazy not to use your bilingualism sometimes, okay? I just think it's a missed opportunity. And pretending that, you know, everything should happen in English all the time, well, what's happening in your student's head is they're still thinking in Russian, whether you like that or not. And my feeling is in those situations, you've got two choices. You can fight that or you can accept it and work with it. And I think it's much better to accept it and work with it. Okay, I've
Mhm.
got two more questions, if that's okay, from Ms. Discombobulated. One was, some of my students have acquired a great deal of lexical sets, but when speaking, they use them reluctantly. For example, instead of saying I'm really into or I'm really keen on, they will say I like or I love. How can we upgrade their use of vocabulary? So I have a few different answers to that, I think. I think the first thing is, most of us, most of the time, once we have one way of saying something, we'll stick with that one way of saying it, okay? And in a way, from a student's point of view, why do they need to produce I'm really into or I'm really keen on if they can just say, yeah, I really like it, I love it? I mean, it doesn't add anything to their communicative competence or their communicative ability. That doesn't mean don't teach it. That doesn't mean don't expose students to it. It just means that I think it's unrealistic to expect students to use things that they already have other ways of saying. Okay. They may at some point come to use those phrases if they encounter them enough. And I think in the end, it comes down to, you need to meet them, you need to understand what they mean. If someone asks you, what kind of music are you into? You need to understand that means, what kind of music do you like? Okay, so you have a kind of receptive understanding. You can practice that in terms of receptive understanding. You can ask them, what kind of music are you into? What kind of films are you into? Oh, you like jazz. What kind of jazz are you into? You can have that conversation with them and present that language to them without necessarily expecting them to change away from I like or I love. Over time, they may switch. They may start asking, what kind of music are you into, teacher? So I think it takes time. I think also lexical sets can be difficult because, say you're learning, I don't know, 10 ways of traveling as a lexical set. Well, knowing that, this is a truck, that is a ferry, and that is an airplane, great. Well, you can point at those things and you can name them, but it doesn't really help you say much about them, okay? And so I think when we're teaching these things, we need to think beyond pointing and naming, and we need to be thinking a bit more about when might students actually need to talk about ferry? When might students need to talk about plane? What's the conversation? What's the question that comes before? What kind of things might they say about this? And maybe teach a little bit more the language around the lexical sets and the conversations around each of those bits of vocabulary. And I think that may make it easier as well. But I think just don't be surprised that it takes time from when students first meet something and understand something to when they start actively producing it. And with a lot of language, I mean, think of it this way, okay? The average educated speaker, native or non-native, uses something like 3,000 to 4,000 words a day in their daily vocabulary. The average student who passes proficiency has a deep knowledge of around 12 to 13,000 words. Okay, so that means, 4,000 of those words are active, that you produce them in your speech. The other 8,000, well, maybe you can use some of them when you're writing, but probably half of what you know, whether you're a native or a non-native, actually, is generally passive vocabulary that just sits in the back of your head and is only activated when you meet it, when you're reading or when you're speaking, okay? And I'm sure that's the same for you with Russian. I'm sure there's tons of Russian that you see when you're reading, that you understand, that you process quickly, but you don't use in your day-to-day speech. So I think, don't panic too much about that gap. So the next question was also the last one from Ms. Discombobulated, which was, how do we use Raymond Murphy's English grammar in use or vocabulary in use? Is it doing exercises and reading out loud, learning collocations, prepositional phrases, or what? Well, my first feeling there is those books are designed as self-study books, okay? And they're not designed as classroom material. They're basically books for your students to do as homework and to check the answers and do what they want with them. I personally wouldn't use them in class, but if you are going to, I'm going to put a couple of links here on the VK live stream where you can see some ideas on what you might try to do with some of those things. Okay, so if you really wanted to bring them into the classroom and check them and do something with them, here are some ideas now on the VK wall, on the English click wall, that might help you. I think really, if you're going to bring them into class, it's basically just to check the answers. And as you're checking the answers, it's asking extra questions and exploring what students know about those words. So, you know, it might be something like, I don't know, they see a word like leak out information, or stories have leaked out. So you might just ask, so number 2, yeah, the story has leaked out to the press. How do things leak out to the press? Yeah, maybe somebody leaks them. Why would they do this? What's the point? Maybe they're trying to get an advantage inside the company or inside the political party that they belong to. Okay, and it's just asking questions about the language as you're going through. But personally, I would just say tools and self-study tools, because that's what they were designed for. So if it's okay with you, I have a few more that I've written down. I have a couple of questions from Igor. Igor has asked, first of all, how to use the word builder. I don't know how many of you know the Outcomes series that I've co-authored with Andrew Walkley, but we have this thing called the Vocabulary Builder that you can access online. And again, generally, I would say it's a self-study thing for students to do at home. But if you want to try and do something with it in class, again, there's a blog post there that might help. I'm just going to put that up for you there. And it's basically, it's just ways of encouraging students to look at the word lists at home by building in regular tests into the class. And when I say tests, I mean kind of low stakes tests, not scary testing, not anything where students feel that, you know, if they don't get all the correct answers, they'll be punished. But I think if you're building into your classroom, say you've got 5 minutes left at the end, and you just say, okay, I'm going to do a quick test of the vocab builder, the word builder from last lesson. Let's have a look what you've got. And you just test them in some different ways that I suggest in those blog posts. I think doing that makes the students feel, oh, I better try and learn some of this language because I know my teacher's going to test me and I don't want to look like the stupid one in the class. So, you know, I'll try and do a little bit of revision and try and show the teacher, oh, I've remembered something. A couple of other questions from Igor. One was about, is the communicative approach dying out? It's an interesting question. I think in some ways, I mean, the communicative approach never really caught on in lots of ways. I think most teachers of English around the world haven't necessarily been that affected by the communicative approach. And I also think the original ideas behind the communicative approach, which were really to do with talking to students, getting students to do little tasks, helping them say what they were trying to say better, and moving on, that never really became a major mainstream thing. I think what you had was course books like Headway, which integrated little bits of communicative methodology like debates or role plays or, you know, discussions or games or whatever, but basically still presented a kind of traditional grammar syllabus, traditional lexical sets. And so I guess my first answer would be, Is the communicative approach dying out? Well, was it ever really that healthy in and of itself? I think maybe where there are problems with the communicative approach is when it comes to things like memorizing language, testing students, revising, recycling, um, doing some kind of formal study and testing of students, which perhaps some people wouldn't see as traditional kind of communicative approach. I think it's also, as someone interested in the kind of lexical way of thinking about language, I think it's recognizing that sometimes it's not enough just to be able to communicate your ideas. I mean, it's great if you can communicate your ideas, but it's not enough. And I'll give a quick example. Yesterday in one of my classes online, I had two Russian speakers who were talking about social media and blog posts. And one of them said to the other, the problem is a lot of blog posts have a lot of water in them. And the other student was saying, yeah, I know. And Instagram posts, there's so much water in them. And I'm listening to this thinking, you two obviously understand each other and you're having a conversation in English, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't understand why you're mentioning water. Well, from a communicative approach point of view, they successfully communicated their message. If they were talking to someone like me who doesn't share Russian as a first language, well, this conversation makes no sense because we don't talk about water in this metaphorical way. So I have to stop and say, I've no idea what you mean. What are you talking about? Oh, you mean they pad out lots of blog posts. There's a lot of fluff. There's a lot of padding. And they're looking at me saying, you don't say water? No, of course we don't. That's obviously Russian in English. So sometimes just being able to communicate your idea, especially in a monolingual classroom, is a problem because that won't transfer outside of English speakers who also share your first language. Maybe you know those old jokes about the two Russian guys in London who stop and ask each other the time, and it's something like, what clock? 3 o'clock, such much, and they're kind of translating directly from Russian, but they're having this conversation in English. Well, a communicative approach would say that's great. They've managed to communicate. For me, that's a lovely starting point, but it's not enough. And so if what's happening is teachers are recognizing this and they're spending a bit more time on saying, yes, that's great, you've communicated, but here's how to communicate better, I think that's really, really useful. I've got one more question from Igor, which was, why is there all this buzz about micro teaching? I must admit, I wasn't aware of the buzz around micro teaching, but I think for those of you that don't know what it is, it's basically getting people to do little tiny bits of teaching among their peers. I think where micro teaching is great is if you're running teacher development or teacher training courses. So with Lexical Lab, every summer we do a London-based summer school, and we do a course called Teaching Lexically. And everyone on that course is already an experienced teacher, mainly non-native teachers, but some native teachers as well. And we can't do live lessons in the way that we could if we had a group of students, because we're all also teachers. And so, you can pretend to be students, but we all know we're not. What you can do is little bits of micro teaching where I say, okay, I want you to take that page from vocabulary in use and go through the answers with 3 other people in your group, doing it as you would with a normal class, asking questions, working the language, giving extra examples, getting ideas from the other group, the other members of the group, and then you can give feedback on that. That's a really powerful kind of training and developmental tool because it's kind of like teaching, but without having to stand up in front of your peers and your colleagues and pretend that they're foreign language students. So I guess if there is a buzz around micro teaching, it's because it's useful and flexible in those kinds of contexts. I've got one more question here, and then I'll see if there's any others. I can't remember where I got this question from. My apologies to the asker, which was basically, how much use of first language should there be, especially when we're reading texts or watching films with new words? My first answer to that would be that how much new language is there? Okay. And if there's so much new language in the reading text, or so much new language in the listening that you're doing, that students are a bit lost and they're kind of clinging on to translation to get them through, then that text is too difficult. I think for me, a basic kind of rule of thumb is, if about more than 10% of the text is new language, it's too difficult. Most of what you read or most of what you listen to in class should be language that students basically know. Maybe they read it slowly, or that they don't always process it when they hear it, but it's language they've met before and language they know. Then I guess it depends on what you're doing, okay? If you're doing a one-to-one class and you're watching a video and students understand most of it, but they stop you and say, what does rule of thumb mean? Well, maybe you explain it in English, or maybe if there's a direct translation that works in exactly the same way in Russian, give them the Russian version. That doesn't mean that's the only thing you're ever going to do with that word, okay? You might just write down while you're watching, rule of thumb equals blah, blah, blah in Russian. When you then finish watching the video, what you can do is go back, have a look at some of the language that came up. You can give extra examples. You can work with it a bit more. So again, I think it's just recognizing the meaning is the easy bit, okay? If you can use L1 to cover the meaning quickly, that's fine. But you still need, over time, to show students examples of how those phrases or words or chunks of language work in context, okay? So it's just thinking, how can I get the meaning out of the way in a quick and easy way? And that may be Google Images, that may be a quick English explanation, that may be a translation. It may be all three of those things sometimes, okay? That's the easy bit. The difficult bit is students working out what those words are used to do and how those words work, okay? So that's the end of the questions that I've made a note of.
Mhm.
So,
And
oh, I
here we
see some other
have,
questions coming in.
yeah, we have one more from
From
Maria.
Maria.
Yeah.
Is studying with natives fundamentally different from lessons with non-natives? Absolutely not. You get excellent non-native teachers and you get really terrible native speaker teachers. Being a good teacher has nothing to do with where you were born or which language you grow up speaking. It really doesn't. I know friends in Russia who run language schools, and in the past, they tried to get native speakers to come and work in their schools. After 2 or 3 native speakers working there, they changed their mind and decided, we're going to stop advertising, because they ended up with one alcoholic guy, another Jesus freak guy who just wanted to tell the kids about Jesus, another guy who slept with half the students. You know, none of them were good teachers. They just happened to have been born in English-speaking countries. At the same time, I've met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Russian teachers of English who are amazing teachers. So I think studying with a good teacher is fundamentally different to studying with a bad teacher. And that good teacher may or may not have grown up speaking English as a first language, and that bad teacher may or may not have grown up speaking English as a first language. So I think when you're looking for, you know, someone to teach you, or someone to teach people you know, you shouldn't be looking for native or non-native. You should be looking for someone who teaches in a way that you relate to, in a way that you have faith in a principled way, and in a way that you feel you can learn from. Yeah. I mean, I know with my Indonesian, again, a lot of what I've learned as a foreign speaker of Indonesian, especially early on, I learned it from bilingual people. So I learned very early on, I learned a lot of Indonesian from hanging around with English people, American people, Australians who had been living in Indonesia longer than I had. And I would hear them say things and I would ask them, what does that mean? Or I would want to say something and I would ask them, how do I say blah, 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 blah in Indonesian? And so, you know, none of us were native speakers of Indonesian, but collectively between us, we were all improving our level of Indonesian. Um, you know, so it's nothing to do with where you're born. It's really not fundamentally different. The only fundamental difference is if you're a native speaker, you're allowed to pretend you're a qualified language teacher after doing a 1-month English course, and often without speaking any other foreign languages yourself. If you're a non-native teacher, the bar is much higher. You know, you've learned English yourself over years and years and years. So you have all this experience of being a language learner yourself. Probably for many non-natives, you've done a local philology or pedagogical degree. So, you know, you've spent 3 years studying as well how to become a teacher. When I first started, I didn't speak a foreign language and I did a 1-month course. So I was way less qualified to teach than your average Russian teacher of English. So, you know, if you want one fundamental difference, there's the fundamental difference.
Mhm. There are some more questions came
Okay, tell
during
me.
your talk. Well, the first one, like a review on your book, Teaching Lexically,
Yeah.
from Svetlana. Hugh, thanks a lot for your teaching lexically. We fell in love with the lexical approach.
Thank
Every
you.
lesson, I try to use it with my students. They get used to it and it gives good results. I'm happy about it. How much time should we spend it in our lessons? I guess how much time should we spend on lexical approach?
So I guess I don't think of it like that. I think of a lexical approach as
As a
an
whole?
approach to language and a way of thinking about language. So for me, anytime I'm teaching new vocabulary or explaining something or dealing with grammar, I would approach any of that language in a way that's informed by my understanding of the way language works, which is I would think of examples, I would give examples of the vocabulary with grammar and vocabulary that often goes with them. I would give examples of the grammar with vocabulary and maybe other grammar structures that they often occur with. So I don't think it's about time. I think it's just about thinking about language in that way all the time. How long you spend on dealing with new language in class really depends. I think the majority of classroom time should probably be speaking. And then maybe, you know, you need to do some listening, you need to do some reading. But I think you also need to be thinking about at the end of my lesson, whether it's a 45-minute lesson, a 90-minute lesson, a 3-hour lesson, how much language have I made available for my students to help them talk about something better? Okay, so if my goal is today we're going to talk about food, okay, at the end of a 1-hour lesson, how much language that's maybe new for most of my students have I given them to help them talk about food better in the future? And personally, you know, I think there needs to be a fair bit of new language. If I'm going to language classes and all I'm doing is talking and being lectured about grammar, well, at the end of an hour, I feel what have you actually taught me? What's new? What have you helped me to say better that I didn't already know? And if the answer is, I gave you 2 new words, well, that's not enough for the amount of money that I'm paying you. You know, I want more than that. I'm a demanding customer in this respect. So I guess, yeah, my answer would be, don't think about it in terms of time. Think about it in terms of always looking at language in that kind of way and making sure that your classroom is a language rich environment and that the language you provide helps students to achieve their communicative goals better.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And also we have a question. What is your feeling? What is your attitude towards flipped classroom? What do you think about it?
So I think the flipped classroom is basically a modern word for what we used to call homework. Okay. And I think it's great if students do homework, but I know from my own experience that we can't rely on students to do homework. And I personally don't like basing my lessons with a whole class on the assumption that they will all have done some homework, because it never happens. And, you know, yes, it's great if we can make some self-study material available in digital format. I think that's brilliant. Okay. But whether it's digitally delivered or delivered in a book or on the back of a match packet, good students will do homework and motivated students will do homework, and lazy students won't do it, whether it's online, offline, face to face, whatever, it doesn't matter. So I think it's great if you can say, have a look on my school's website and you'll find more vocabulary connected to talking about food. That's great. Not every student will do it. And if you're basing your next lesson on the belief that they will, well, try and do that for a couple of weeks and come back and tell me how that works for you. Because you'll always have these problems of you saying, right, so remember, as part of the flipped classroom, you all did page 54 online yesterday. Half the students will go, yeah, about that, teacher. My internet connection wasn't working last night. Okay. Yeah, what's your excuse? Oh, your dog died again. Okay. I see. It's just not going to happen. So I think, you know, personally, I think we should just call it what it is, which is homework. And if the homework ties into the classes and is available to help students develop what they've done in class, that's great. If you're relying on everyone doing the homework before you can deliver your next class, good luck. You know, it's
Yeah,
not going to happen.
that's what I thought about it.
It's, you know, so it's the voice of bitter experience.
Yeah, that's another word, modern. And Elvira asks how to help our students not to forget the vocabulary they learned.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think you need to be building in lots of different things to the classroom, okay? I think you need to be doing regular revision activities, you know, like little tests at the beginning of each class. You can also be doing kind of, you know, flipped classroom stuff as, you know, extra homework to help them remember. I'm just trying to find something that I wrote about this as well. 1 second, give me a minute. I'll put the link up here in a second. Yeah, I think we need to be placing more emphasis on students remembering things, okay? And we need to be honest about how the main problem with learning a foreign language is the memory load, okay? There's a lot of language to remember. I'm just going to add this in here. So I think we need to be doing 2 or 3 things. We need to be revising and recycling language ourselves in class. So we need to be, you know, doing little tests, making sure students can remember, sending homeworks which encourage them to remember things, making Quizlet cards which they test themselves with, maybe using first language, second language translation, give them, here are 20 sentences from last week, here's the Russian equivalent. In class, next lesson, say the Russian, see if they can remember the exact English phrases. So lots of that kind of thing where you're going back over things that you've learned. I think on top of that, if you're writing longer examples for the vocabulary, or you're giving longer explanations for the vocabulary that students meet, you can consciously include language that you know you've covered in class, okay? So you're sort of just keeping that language moving in the classroom and moving in the students' brains. Some of you may have seen these little 1-minute English video things I make that I put on YouTube. Sometimes when I'm making them, I deliberately include phrases or bits of vocabulary that I know I've covered previously, okay? So it's kind of, it's just subliminal recycling or kind of subliminal representing the language to students. So I'm just going to put in a link to those as well, so you can have a look at them. And again, I think it's nice to try and encourage students to use that language, but don't be surprised if the language doesn't immediately become part of their active vocabulary. It won't, it'll take time.
Mm-hmm. I think just great answer was such a question. And here we have Alexandra, and she has also a big question. Let me read. Here I wonder if I could ask a very specific question. In outcomes up intermediate, in the topic have get something done, you
Yeah.
explained that get is more informal and colloquial, and that
Yeah.
get is more common with some words.
Yeah.
Here with others. For me, more common means that I can still choose either options if it won't be a mistake, although it may sound a bit awkward in
Yes.
exercise 2 grammar reference. You always give two answers.
Yes.
With get and with have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Except for the first sentence, where apparently we can say only we had our luggage stolen. Yeah.
Yes.
Why is that? Is get never used with stolen, or when we are the victims and not the organizers of a station?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, it's a good question. So I think when I was a younger teacher, I used to make have something done and get something done much more complicated than really it needs to be. Okay. I think the vast majority of the time you can use have or get, and they're both fine. Like, you know, I'm going to get my hair cut next week. I'm going to have my hair cut next week. We're having the house redecorated at the moment. We're getting the house redecorated at the moment. I got my car fixed last week. I had my car fixed last week. It really doesn't matter in any of those contexts which one you say. With the luggage stolen, it's a specific example or specific case because it happens to you and you had no role in its happening. Okay, so with get your haircut, have your haircut, get your house painted, have your house painted, have your car repaired, get your car repaired, it's something that you organize for someone else to do. Okay, having your luggage stolen, unless you're insane, you don't organize for someone else to do. It's just a weird accident that happens to you. Okay, so I think particularly when you've got that stolen thing, like, you know, I had my passport stolen when I was on the metro in Paris. You wouldn't say get because you didn't play any role in making the other person do it. So I think that particular verb is a kind of unusual example. almost always the rest of the time, they're basically interchangeable. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think people worry about them too much. And, you know, it doesn't matter. When we were writing outcomes, we spent like one afternoon just looking for examples on the internet. And what we found was almost always the traditional rules that you're told in course books just don't work with have and get something done. It's only with those very, very specific examples.
Mhm. And in connection to learning new vocabulary, there is a question: what ways of lex learning without the use of a textbook can you give us? So, what are the effective ways of learning lexis without a textbook?
Um, Read as much as you can, particularly graded readers would be my first thought. Okay. Um, I think unless you're kind of advanced or proficiency level, you're probably better off reading graded readers. I think there's a huge number of really, really good graded readers on the market now. All the big publishers have their own graded readers. And they're great for recycling a lot of language you will have met already, and for adding to that bit by bit by bit. So it's that 10% rule I said earlier. You know, you're not going to be drowning in new language, but there will be some for you to learn from.
Mhm.
After that, I would just say it's all to do with exposure. So find things you're interested in, find things you like reading, find people you like listening to, watch TV shows, watch them with subtitles, watch them with subtitles in your own first language if it helps you. Um, but I think that the bottom line is the people who really learn are the people who read a lot. Um, and, you know, if you are using a course book, you also need to be going home, revising, recycling what you've done in class.
Mhm. And in your book, you talk about that we should use our first language, right?
I wouldn't say should, but I think it's a bit strange if you don't. Yeah.
And there is a question: should we insist on using only English in our lessons? It's like, don't use Russian.
Personally, no, because if you don't know how to say something in English and you know how to say it in Russian, and you know that your teacher speaks Russian, why would you not just say, teacher, how do you say blah, blah, blah in English? Oh, it's this. Thank you. It just seems weird to me that you wouldn't allow yourself to do that. So I think in those kind of situations, or sometimes when you ask questions, like, you know, any other times when you might need to sound different groups of people out. Sometimes, even when I'm teaching, okay, I teach teachers a lot.
Mhm.
And even those teachers, they're like proficiency level. Sometimes in a group, they will say, does anybody know how to say blah, 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 blah in English? And they will have a little discussion and they will come up with the best translation. Well, if proficiency level Russian teachers of English do that sometimes, why would you not let your students do that? So I just think it's about being honest about the fact that all of us sometimes rely on first language.
Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it is easier to use simple words, yeah, and or
Yeah, I mean,
more.
you could, of course, you could force students to use simple words, but then how are they going to get to the more complicated ways of
Yeah,
saying things? Sometimes the Russian is a bridge to a more sophisticated way of saying things.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
I'm going to have to sign off, I'm afraid, because I'm
Okay.
doing another webinar
It was
to a
really
different
nice
audience.
listening to you and seeing you. And I hope you'll come back
I hope
so
so too.
next time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And
Yeah,
guys, I think colleagues can write something in comment section, yeah,
thank
and
you.
you can just let them know,
Thank you. I'll
let
have a
them
look
ask.
through all the comments later on as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you
Thank
really
you
much.
very, very much for your time and for your attention.
Yeah, good. See you next time.
All right. Take care. Keep in touch.
Good night.